Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second virtual public meeting for the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan. We're letting people in, so just bear with us for a couple of minutes as we will get started. Feel free to type in your name and a group or any interest that you represent as well. And as Vic said too, on behalf of the city and all of us, we're thrilled to have you with us and look forward to your input. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Dotson to kick us off today as we start the presentation and the meeting.
Thank you, Nile. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second public outreach meeting. I want to thank all of you for taking the time this evening. I think all of your input this evening will be very valuable to our process. So before we get started, my name is Mike Dotson. I'm the Director of Parks and Community Services. I've been with the city now for about 25 years, and I'd like to introduce our incredible staff that we also have working on this plan. So they will come on camera as I introduce them. First of all, I'd like to introduce Vic Randall. He is the project manager for the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan. He's been with the city for a little bit over 8 years. And then we have Ann Dunleavy. Ann Dunleavy is our superintendent of recreation, and she's been with the city over 20 years. And we have Rick Knight. Rick Knight is our public works capital projects manager, and he's been with the city over 30 years. And then we have Theron Jones. Theron Jones is our superintendent of parks and building maintenance, and Theron's been with the city a little over 12 years. So as you can see, we have an incredible staff that's been with the city a long time, has excellent knowledge, and will be very valuable to this process. So before we get started, the other thing I just wanted to bring up is this is a plan that will be providing input on the parks, trails, and open space. It will not include our facilities, such as our community center, the James Lemos Pool, or the senior center. Also, I just want to inform everybody here this evening that we are also running parallel with this, our lighting and landscaping district. We're looking at options to create a citywide assessment, which would be a parks, landscape, and lighting district. And I believe we're in a very unique situation by having these two run parallel with each other. That way, with the plan that we develop throughout this process, it'll hopefully, with the vote of the community and the support of the community, give us a funding source. So when we identify the improvements we'd like to make and the capital projects, hopefully we'll have that money available then to implement that. So again, I'd just like to thank everybody. Again, if you have any questions after this is over this evening, you can contact any of our staff at any time that I've introduced this evening. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our consultant, Doug Grove, who is president of RHA Consulting.
Great, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm Doug Grove. I'm president with RHA. We're landscape architects and planners. We're based in Riverside, but we do work all over the state. Just a couple of years ago, I just wrapped up the Pleasant Hill Parks Recreation District Master Plan as well. And really excited to be back up in the Bay Area, in the East Bay, working with Benicia. I've been doing parks recreation planning for my entire career, over 35 years, and really excited to be with Benicia doing this project. So I'll give you a little bit of overview of what our outcomes and desires are for this project. Can you advance? There we go. Perfect. All right. So obviously, we really want to maximize community engagement so we can guide the plan. And that's what this meeting tonight is about. We've had some stakeholder meetings over the last couple of months as well. Some of you may be involved in those, but we really want to get your input. It's really critical. This plan will not succeed without your input. We're going to provide a detailed level analysis of existing parks, open space, and trails. One of our team members here tonight, Peter Winch with WRT, will be going over some of the things that they're doing as far as analyzing the existing facilities and parks. We want to make sure we ensure a diversity of offerings and equity of access for everybody. So we want to make sure that all of the ideas that come in and all of the things that come out of this plan are accessible to everybody. We want to improve the financial sustainability and ensure adequate maintenance. You've got some great parks in the system, a really good structure there. Some of it's obviously been around for a while. We want to make sure we have funding in there for maintenance to make sure it continues to be in good shape, and also have any new improvements be sustainable as well. We will be developing a capital improvement plan based on the priority setting with the community. So as we get all of the ideas synthesized over the next couple of months, we will be coming back to meet with you in a variety of different ways, these kind of meetings, maybe even some in person, and talking about what priorities you want to see for the elements and the improvements we're going to be recommending. And then finally, taking all this data and developing a strategic and realistic master plan that can go hand in hand with the Parks, Landscape Lighting and Landscape Maintenance District that Mike was talking about. There's a great chance to have some funding there available to do some of these ideas you're all going to come up with. So looking forward to that as well. Our team, again, our firm, again, I mentioned RHA, master planning is what we do, parks planning is what we do. Really excited. I've done over 15 of these park master plans and over a couple hundred park plans and all over the state. And really looking forward to bringing that experience and knowledge to the Benicia plan.
Great, and we're happy to join the RHA team as well. My name is Nilay Bhatt, and I am the principal with Pros Consulting in Indianapolis. But this is all we do, coast to coast, border to border. And I've done several of these all over California and in the Bay Area as well, along with Doug and the WRT team, working in Carlsbad, just finished actually working in Fremont, finished Pleasant Hill and Walnut Creek. San Jose, Gilroy, and so on. So very familiar with the community and the region in general, but also have experience around the country and can help bring the best of the things that we see all over the country to Benicia. I am going to turn it over to Peter Winch from WRT to speak just a little bit about their firm and experience as well.
Thank you, Nilay, and really glad to be part of the team. My name is Peter Winch. I'm with WRT. We are a landscape architecture planning and urban design firm with an architecture practice as well on the East Coast, a national firm, but really focused in California out of our San Francisco office on parks and open space. And again, happy to be part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So, as you can see, between WRT, RHA, and Pros, our intent is really to get the best of local, regional, and national expertise to you. And complementing our team is ETC Institute, which is an independent, statistically valid survey firm. So they will be handling the survey process that we'll talk about a little later here. That's going to be mailed to households throughout Benicia to get input from all of you as a part of this process. Combined as a team, these are just some examples of the agencies we have worked with for park system master plans just all over California, and also the best of the best for nationally accredited and gold medal agencies across the country. So before we go any further, what I'd like to get a sense of is a quick profile of who we have in the audience. So I am going to launch a poll here to get a sense of that. And you should see that on your screen right now. The first question is, what is your gender? You've got 4 choices. Please answer that. Second question is, what age segment are you in? The third question is, how many people are participating in this process with you in this virtual meeting right now? So we have 3 questions, and I look forward to seeing your answers come in very quickly. Okay, this is coming in thick and fast. This is fantastic. I see a pretty good diverse cross section of people. That's fantastic. We'll give y'all about 15 seconds more. Okay, this is great. Going once, going twice. All right, here we go. Let me share the results. So the response for the first question, what is your gender? 60% female, 37% male. One said prefer not to answer. Second question, what age segment are you in? The top one was 55 to 74 with 49% of the audience, followed by 35 to 54 with 31% of the audience, and 14% over the age of 75, and 6% between the ages of 18 to 34. And then last one here, how many people are participating with you in this virtual meeting? In this case, we had 69% of you said only just myself. We had 29%, so 10 of you have at least one other person, and 3%, one other person said 2 other people with you. So this is great. I'm happy to see all of you here. And let us now proceed a little further to have Doug share with you the proposed process for this master plan.
Great, thanks, Neely. We go over a little bit about where we are on this schedule. This is about a year, a little less than a year and a half plan. We started back in January with staff, and as Peter and his group and the rest of the team, we've been doing some existing conditions analysis. That's just wrapping up here at the end of this month. And you'll see some of those, couple of those documents tonight. Those will also be up on the website at some point too, is once we get them all finalized. We're in just the beginning of the public outreach and engagement portion of the plan. That's going to run from now April through September. We've had some focus group meetings, quite a few of them, about 15 total. And then we have these 2 public meetings tonight. All that is to gather the information about what you would like to see in your park system, what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to have more of. That will all be synthesized into the 2 different surveys. Statistically valid survey that's mailed out, Neil will talk about, and an online survey. That information will then be put together and we'll bring it back to everybody in the community back in the late summer, early fall. At that point, we'll go over the priority rankings and we'll start forming our capital improvement plan, putting some costs to all the things that we want to see improved in the system. That'll be September through February of this year and next. Then we'll be putting together some funding strategies in February and how to fund this. A big part of that will be the Parks Lighting Landscape Maintenance District that Mike mentioned earlier. And then finally doing a draft and a final master plan about this time next year. So we've got plenty of time to get input. This is not the only time you're going to get a chance. This is the first chance you get, but we want to get as much as we can. So you'll have plenty of opportunity over the next several months to do that, and then even have some input on the back end as we put the plan together and finalize that.
Great, thank you, Doug. So now I want to share with you all some demographics and trends projections. This is really looking forward in terms of what would Benicia look like. And a caveat here, this is probably the toughest time in terms of getting the most accurate data demographic information, because we are the furthest away from the 2010 census, and we still don't have, we're maybe a few months away from getting the 2020 census data specifically. So as we go through the plan, at some point, I'm sure we will be updating the demographics and trends. But for now, we know that the general trending of the data is pretty accurate. So from that standpoint, you can see a fairly minimal increase in the population projected over the next 10 to 15 years. This data is obtained from ESRI, which is Environmental Services Research Institute, and they look at census tract data. They look at population estimates, and from there on, we look at straight line regression just to estimate how the population will continue growing. So the big change that we see is in the age segments. As you notice, the light blue and the red bars, those are the ones growing the most as you move to the right. In fact, 45% of the population, and the single largest percentage which is, and I refuse to call them seniors because they don't behave like it. It's the active adult population between the ages of 55 and 74. More than 1 out of 3 people in Benicia is projected to fall in that age group. And as a combination of those over the age of 55, almost 45%, so almost 1 out of 2 people in Benicia will be in that age group. On the flip side, about 1 in 3 people will be under the age of 35 with kids and young families as well. So that's something we'll obviously be keeping in mind, as well as race and ethnicity breakdowns too. You continue to get more diverse as a community, with those that the census calls Asian or 2 or more races or some other race all continuing to grow over time. And then ethnicity wise, 1 in 5 people will be what the census calls Hispanic or Latino population. So along with that, from an income characteristic standpoint, as you can see, the blue bar is the per capita income, whereas the orange is the median household income. Per capita is every individual, median household is everybody over the age of 16 living under the same roof. So as a combination of that, you can see Benicia is higher than California and national averages, both for per capita and median household income. But the chart on the right here will show you there are pockets, especially that are darker, where you have a significantly higher percentage of population that is below the poverty level. So that also gives us a sense in terms of socioeconomics of the community for where that population concentration is. Now, moving from demographics into trends, we use a source called SFIA, Sports and Facility Industry Association. And that's where you see the red line is the national average of 100. Anything above and below that means it's that many percentage points higher or lower than the national average. So in this case, you can see everything from volleyball to golf is all in 1 to 30% higher than national averages. Softball and football are just marginally lower. Just a quick note here as well for those of us that are continuing to join in and those already there. If you have any questions during the presentation as well, if you look in just the Zoom bar, you'll see a Q&A button. If you just press on that, you have the ability to type in questions, and the Benicia staff and the consulting team will respond to them even during the presentation and other questions as they come along. We will be responding to those at the end of the session as well. If you just have a comment to make, you can put that in the chat box, like Ron just did about his bocce league with over 500 members. If you have a specific question you want to ask, please put that in the Q&A as you go along as well. So moving on from general sports, our next one here is fitness, market participation index. And that's where you can see everything from Pilates to weightlifting, yoga, jogging, walking for exercise, swimming. All of them are anywhere from 15 to 30% higher than national averages. That's a remarkable number in addition to the outdoor activity where everything is higher than national average. I mean, clearly speaks to the fact that you are a very active community. People love the outdoors as a reason you call Benicia home. And that's why you can see, again, these activities aren't just in the city, but those that people in the city or residents of Benicia like to partake in, whether it's in Benicia or elsewhere. So canoe, kayak, biking, horseback riding, backpacking, fishing, every one of these are all significantly higher here. Again, in terms of dog ownership or dog sports, etc., there are some that are tracked by this, others that are not. But when we get to the needs, we are going to have the ability for you to share your priorities for all of those activities as well. Okay, so that gets us to the public input opportunities. First thing, I'd love for you all to bookmark right now this website, lovebeniciaparks.com. It's a multilingual, mobile-friendly website, fully ADA accessible. All the input, the meetings from today, We will be uploading the recordings from yesterday's meeting and today's meeting on this website. This very presentation will also be there, as will be the results of the polls and the discussions, etc. And in maybe 3 or 4 weeks, you'll have access to an online survey through SurveyMonkey here. Plus, as we continue to develop the plan, in the findings tab and the key events, you'll see updated development for what we build and analyze, as well as future meetings, because we will be coming back to you to present these findings and continue to get your input. So don't think of this as the one or the only chance to get your input. There is also an open-ended comment box on this, where we've had so many community members share some really good feedback in the last several days. And we would love to continue hearing from you all through this process. We've already done meetings with a variety of stakeholder groups, user groups, staff. We even met a leadership group from Benicia High School yesterday as well. So we've had a lot of invitation-only meetings too with different groups. Yesterday and today were obviously these 2 meetings. And based on all the input you provide, we will then be sharing this with ETC Institute for them to craft the first draft of the statistically reliable survey. Working with the staff, we'll finalize this, and this will then sometime in May be mailed to households across Benicia. You have the option to take it in English or Spanish as well. You can do it by mail or by phone, or there'll be a one-off online link that you can also use. And we'll be mailing a few thousand surveys, with the goal being getting over 375 completed ones. So we have a 95% level of confidence and a 5% plus or minus margin of error. So this, tax referendum, these are some type of questions that you can ask with bond referendums, barriers to participation. How would you want Benicia to communicate with you in the future? Or if you had $100, where should the city be spending the money? This identical questionnaire will also be then shared through SurveyMonkey on the website, lovebeniciaparks.com. So if you don't get this random and anonymous survey, you can also go to the website and share your input, and we will be capturing all of that. So the intercept surveys, these virtual public meetings, the stakeholder interviews, the focus groups, the key leader interviews, the statistically reliable survey, the online survey, and the website, all of this put together is going to really help inform the public input and help us set the priorities that we'll come back to you with the vision and priorities and talk more about. Okay, so I want to open up a second poll here, and this is about usage, quality, and access of the parks. So the first question here is, and you'll see the questions open up in the poll box. How often do you use any City of Benicia parks, trails, or open space? Everything from at least weekly to I do not use it, or something in between. Second question is, do you live within a 10-minute walk to a park or a trail? And the third question is, which park amenities do you use regularly? This is where you have a multiple choice, so you can choose as many as you regularly use. And then the fourth question in this is, how would you rate the overall quality of the city's parks, open space, and trails? Lastly, how do you travel to your nearest local park? So these are the 5 questions I'd love to get your feedback on as we go through this process right now. And I will be sharing the results in a few moments. I see a number of your responses coming in already. That is great. All right, about 80% of you have responded so far, which is wonderful. I am going to give you at least a few seconds more for the rest of you to please share your feedback. Give you all a few more seconds here. Okay, about 10 more seconds. All right, everybody, going once, going twice. Here we go. Okay, so the results for the first one. How often do you use any City of Benicia parks, trails, or open space? 82% of you said at least weekly, 11% said monthly, and then 3% said at least 6 times a year, whereas 5% said at least 2 to 5 times per year. For the second question here, do you live within a 10-minute walk to a park or a trail? 89% of you said yes, we do. 11% said no, we do not live within a 10-minute walk. As for which park amenities do you use regularly, the top response, 79% said shoreline access, closely followed by 76% said trails and pathways. And then the third highest choice, which was 45%, said playgrounds. Few other choices here. We had 34% say sports courts, basketball, bocce ball, tennis, pickleball, etc. And we had about 29% say athletic fields, baseball, football, soccer, disc golf, and 26% say dog parks. So those were the results here. Next question, how would you rate the overall quality of the parks, trails, and open space system here? And I can see 74% of you said good, 8% said excellent, 18% said fair. Last question here is, how do you travel to your nearest local park? 68% of you said I walk, 8% said I bike, and only 24% said I drive. So more than 3 out of 4 of you either walk or bike to a park, which is wonderful. So I am now going to turn it over to Peter and his excellent team at WRT to share a little bit on the existing conditions and what they have analyzed for parks in the city. Peter?
Great, thanks again, Nilay, and really interesting to see the results of those questions. I think I want to try to work that in as we go through our analysis of the park system. What we've done 2 things. One is look at the park system overall as a citywide collection of parks and public spaces. And then the second is to visit each park and do an assessment of the park as a whole and its individual components. So there's sort of a scale thing here, starting with the scale of the city and then moving down. And I'm not going to go through all of the work. There's a lot there and it's been really interesting, but just sort of hit some of the highlights. You can see here on the previous slide, the list of parks, and that's really showing the existing park system, but also those shoreline spaces. And that was fascinating to see the popularity of the shoreline access. It wasn't even really fully recorded or represented in the last Parks Master Plan. Also the open spaces that are protected by zoning that are also not really part of the park system, but are relevant for thinking about the park system. Moving on to this map, we're seeing the distribution of park amenities. This is traditional recreation features like bocce. I see a comment here that there's a bocce league in town with over 500 members. Bocce courts are shown in pink here, sort of one of the darker pinks. These colors can be a little hard to pick out. We also tried to map some of the intangible qualities of parks. Views in particular, views being one of the qualities that kind of stands out in Benicia. Next slide. The other main activity that we did was to visit every park and assess the condition both of the park as a whole and of individual recreation and other amenities in the parks. We looked at each park in terms of its its success, in terms of access and connectivity, in terms of its overall condition and functionality, in terms of its safety and comfort, maintenance, the presence of trails, and then we also tried to record other things that might be unique for each park. So you can sort of see on the right here, one of the scoring sheets, a sample scoring sheet for one of the parks, Alvarez Park, one of the waterfront spaces, scoring them on each of these metrics. And overall, key takeaways from those 3 days of site visits, and I was not part of that. My colleagues Emily and Wenji bonded over 3 days in Benicia parks. But as I understand it, some of the highlights are that the athletic fields are in really good shape. The trails and parks are often really well integrated, and the parks get a lot of use. And you can see that by, again, I'm going to tie in this poll. A huge percentage of you are visiting the parks every week, or maybe multiple times a week. What's not working so well? We saw there's certain features of the park, like paving, that need attention, that are maybe suffering after a period of time. And we see some issues with the success of turf in some areas, or planting in some areas where you see exposed dirt, aging furnishings in some locations, maybe inconsistent signage, not always present. And actually, interestingly, areas where there is turf and maybe it's doing well, but the turf isn't necessarily used. And so there's an opportunity there to be more efficient, both with our budget and with our watering, to think about how to replace certain areas of turf that aren't necessary with other features.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter. I want to now get into some other polling questions about communication and barriers to participation. So I'm going to open up the third poll here. You should see that on your screen. The first question is about the 3 most preferred ways for you to learn about the City of Benicia's parks, open space, or trails. Again, multiple choice, pick your top 3 most preferred ways. Second question here is, which is the largest barrier? 1, biggest barrier. And think of this pre-pandemic when you had sort of, access to everything, is what prevented you from using the city's parks, open space, and trails more often. So 2 questions here: preferred ways of communication and barriers to access or participation. Okay, I see your results coming in quickly. That's wonderful. I'm looking at some of the questions in the meanwhile as well. I love Mark Dean's comment about it's better in Benicia. And then Gretchen, I'm glad you like the teleport access part as well. I was half hoping someone may just tongue in cheek perhaps choose that as well. And I know Theron appreciated that choice too, so that's great. I'll give you all just a few seconds more, team. About 80% of you have responded so far. That's wonderful. And Marnix Van Amers, I know you mentioned your comment about no mention of the Levy walking trail. We're not mentioning any specific park sites or trails here. This is more overall access. But if you have anything specific to ask about that or make a comment about any specific site, please do so. We would love to hear from you. Okay, and then Gretchen, I see your point as well here with texting not included in the communication part. That's why we'd like for you to put in that in the other choice. So if you do put in texting, that would be great. I think that's definitely an option, and I know a number of agencies do use that as well. Okay, so let's look at your results here. I have about 85% of you have answered. I'll give you just about 10, 15 seconds more. If anyone's also typing in questions here, we'll certainly wait for that. Okay, everybody, 10 seconds. Still going through your choices. 3 most preferred ways to learn and the largest barrier for participation. All right, going once, going twice. Okay, so for the first one, the 3 most preferred ways to learn about the city's parks, open space, or trails. The number one is the city website that 64% of you chose, followed by email at 50%, and word of mouth as well as the activity guide tied at 44% each. The second question about what is the largest barrier that prevents you from using the City of Benicia parks, open space, and trails more often? The top one, 25% of you chose that, said I am too busy. 22% said lack of amenities in the parks. 11% said lack of wayfinding signage for trails and open space, and 17% said other. Type in the chat box. So this is really, really helpful, everyone. Let's look at the last sort of area of polls and questions here. And this is about improvements and new development. So I am going to open these questions here as well. The first one is about which 3 amenities are you and members of your household most interested in? Pick the top 3 you are most interested in, as in the first question. Second question is about what are the 3 most important improvements that the City of Benicia can make at existing parks over the next 10 years. And the last question here is your satisfaction with the overall value you believe you receive from the City of Benicia's Parks and Community Services Department. So 3 questions here, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Zoom unfortunately limits polls to only 10 choices. So if there is something that isn't here, please choose the other option and type that in the chat box as well so we can capture it, please. Okay, I see the responses coming in quickly. That's wonderful. And I see Jeff's note as well saying we need pickleball courts outdoors. Ron Kane typed in the chat box about the playground at Bridgeview Park is used every day. Please add a swing set. Corby Stelzer talks about hockey rink improvements. All right, thank you very much, all of you. Please keep sharing your input. I have about 60% of you that have responded so far. So we'll give you a minute or 2 more. Megan Richards talks about the city needs to address the inequality between fields for girls and boys sports. Judy talks about improve the size and condition of the dog park. Alicia talks about I'd like to see an outdoor performance space or amphitheater added to a park space. That's great. Carrie, I see your note in the question as well, talking about would like to see sponsorships offered for the pocket parks. Again, that's a great input here. I know a lot of cities Do look at partnerships as well for everything from signage to maintenance support, etc. too. So thank you for that. Your point's well taken. David also talks about more availability for full court indoor basketball. Thank you, David. Bill speaks about the interest in bocce and especially lateral play creative parks. That's helpful. Thank you, Bill. And Kerry said, ooh, I love the idea of small amphitheaters. That's wonderful too. Thank you. Okay, so 85% of you have responded to the questions so far on the poll. I'll give you 30 seconds more for those that are still looking at these choices. Please do so now, and we will end the poll shortly. Ron also mentions in the chat box, please add a garden sitting area to the open space next to the basketball court at Bridgeview Park. There's a plan floating around that has very low water usage. Stephen talks about more access for walking and running along the water if possible. Megan says the girls' fields are nowhere near as kept up as those for boys. As the mother of a girl and a boy, it's hard to explain to my daughter why she gets a bench behind a chain link fence and the boys get a dugout. Ron Kane talks about adding a platform stage at Bridgeview Park for concerts, outdoor yoga, theater, etc. Wonderful view of the bay. And Kathleen speaks to, I wish softball had as many fields as baseball, since they seem to share all their fields. It seems like there is not as much time provided. Okay, everyone, I'm going to close the poll right now and let us see the results here for the poll. So for the first question, which 3 amenities are you and members of your household most interested in? 81% said open space trails, fitness trails, and pathways. I see about 39% then said water access, kayak, paddle boating, outrigger canoes. I see 33% actually with sports courts, basketball, pickleball, and tennis. And 31% talk about playgrounds as well. And then a number of other options here. For the second question here, what are the 3 most important improvements the city of Benicia can make at existing parks over the next 10 years? Number 1, 58% said expand and connect the trail system. I see 36% have said improve and expand restroom facilities in existing parks. 25% have said build new or upgrade existing sports courts, basketball, pickleball, and tennis. 22% have said add public art. And 31% have also said more shade structures and picnic tables. That's great, everybody. Thank you. And the last question here. Please rate your satisfaction with the overall value you receive from the City of Benicia's Parks and Community Services Department. 64% said somewhat satisfied, 22% said very satisfied. So about 86% said somewhat or very satisfied. 6% said neutral, and 6% said somewhat dissatisfied. 1 person says, I don't know. So this is very, very helpful, everybody. Just the next steps before I open it up for questions here. We will obviously finish with the second meeting today. Once this is done, we'll load all of this on lovebeniciaparks.com, have a statistically valid survey, an online survey, both that will be launched in the next month. And then we'll come back over summer to present the findings from the needs assessment for the community before we then move into the next steps for the capital improvement plan, the visioning, and so on. So I'm going to turn it over for questions. I will stop sharing my screen here so that our team can turn on their cameras and we can respond to your questions right now. Okay, so I'm seeing the questions in the order we have here. David talks about maybe a tough sell in California, but even a small splash park is amazing for children. David, I agree. We heard a lot about just play and water features, even from the high school kids yesterday, who mentioned something like that too, especially when it gets hot. So again, thank you for the input. We will take note of that. Gretchen also talks about natural turf just doesn't hold up well in the winter when dogs and soccer are still very active. I hear you, Gretchen. Thank you so much. And then Kerry speaks about why not have some kind of tag like a medallion at each park site so people could try to collect them by photographing them. I think that's an interesting idea. Mike, Vic, any thoughts on that? Anne, have you all talked about this, heard about this?
I think that's a great idea, Carrie. I mean, we're currently doing a weekend search where we put a picture. We're doing something similar in nature, but we could definitely build on that based on Carrie's suggestion. We're currently doing something similar via Facebook, but I think that's a great idea, Carrie. Thank you.
Then Kathy has a question about Duncan Graham Park really needs an expanded playground, swings, benches, and better basketball court. This is a park that's really a neighborhood center. Mike, Vic, any of you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I'll take that. So we've actually had several comments about swings. I know that's very important. It can be challenging, based on space limitations, but when we start to replace our playgrounds, that's absolutely something we'll look at. And we're very aware of our basketball courts and also our pathways through the parks. The asphalt's been deteriorating over time, and that is something we will be looking at extensively through this process.
Great, thank you. And then Kate also speaks about Duncan Graham Park needs a full body makeover, please. We hear you, understood, Kate. Thank you very much. Art speaks about my wife and I take lunch the Spade or 12th Street Park to watch the straits, trains, boating, and birds. That's wonderful, Art. It's great to hear. Belinda speaks about, do you distinguish between active parks with amenities and passive parks where people could do Tai Chi, birdwatch, picnic, and quiet areas, please? Doug or Peter, do either one of you want to speak to that?
Yes, obviously we want to have a wide variety of park types of facilities going in. And I think the city has a great start with that. And we can take some of the parks that maybe aren't as heavily used and do some of those other more passive type events and activities. So yes, we'll definitely be looking at all opportunities. So those are great suggestions.
Thank you. And Gretchen speaks about when will we look into developing an Old Town dog park?
I can take that, Nilay.
Sure.
That'll be part of this process. I mean, as we go through this process, we've had a lot of people that have obviously shown interest in a downtown dog park. So, as we start to evaluate different sites, we'll be looking at what site could possibly be a suitable place for a downtown dog park.
And while I have you, Mike, Natalie also asks about swimming wasn't included in the survey. How does the James Lemos pool fit into the park plan update? I know you mentioned this at the beginning, but Mike, if you want to just speak to that again, please.
Yeah, I'll just say that, our facilities were not included in this plan. It didn't include the James Lemos Swim Center, the community center, or the senior center. This is strictly with the parks, trails, and open space.
Mark speaks about polls show a multi-use trail system throughout the city, and open space is the way to go. Good way to get to the amphitheater and birdwatch. Agreed, Mark. I see connectivity and trails in general in pretty much every meeting we've had. That's come up as a pretty high priority. So rest assured that's something we're going to be thinking about as well. Carrie also speaks to would love to see a dedicated public art park, especially at the heart of Old Benicia, since the old entry was J Street at the park at the corner of J and First. Should be a destination park with an iconic piece of art along the lines of a small version of the Bean in Chicago. Mike, Vic, any thoughts?
I just say that, obviously we know throughout this process, art's going to be a very important piece that people would like to see implemented into the park system. So this is something new to me. I think it's something that we can look into and, you know, see how it would possibly fit into one of our parks. But art will be something looked at throughout this process.
Yeah, that's great. Bill, I see your question in the chat box as well. Could you please put that in the Q&A section so we can capture all of those questions here as well? Jeff, same for you for the pickleball. If you can please put that in the question and answer section here versus the chat box so we can all capture that for later as well, please. Gretchen speaks about the greatest majority of people are walkers and pathway users. Why do we spend so little funding and maintaining paths? Mike, you're on mute.
Sorry. I'll say that, you know, through this process so far, we've really noticed that, you know, trails and pathways are becoming very popular. And I think a lot of that had to do with the pandemic and people getting out and how people are using the parks and seeing what's available in the parks is changing that. So again, you know, we're very limited on our budget. And I think that's why it's very important that I mention again, the citywide assessment. For us to maintain the 28 parks we have, all the pocket parks, all the open space, our medians, our lighting and landscaping districts, very limited in staff and funds. So again, I'll bring it up to everybody on this call tonight. I'd love to have you a champion of that parks, lighting and landscaping district and be a big part of that, because this will be our funding source. And this will allow us to look at other areas that haven't been maintained like they should be and allow us to maintain them properly.
Okay, that's great. Stephen talks about, sorry, I don't know the exact name, but to the west of Lower First Street, there's a pretty funky looking fenced off area with a crane near the half-sunken boat. Any chance of developing that area as a park, recreation, or walking space?
I would just say that that space is privately owned, so that would be you know, that would be up to the owner's discretion. There is the prospect of Bay Trail portion being built there at some point, but at this point, that's not something that would be driven by the city. That would be driven by the property owner.
Okay, great, thank you. Kathy speaks about more shade trees on 9th Street Park. Need senior-friendly trails at Channing Circle Park to line up to Bay Ridge Trail. Current trail is dangerous with bikes coming down and hikers not necessarily visible. Thank you, Kathy. We will make note of that. Elizabeth, need natural activity areas with hills, rocky area, and what one could enjoy in open space. Great, thank you. Corby speaks about the hockey inline rink is in dire need of resurfacing. Pandemic, many people have taken up quad skating and rollerblading as well. And the options to skate safely in Benicia are very limited. Would love more trails where skating is acceptable as well. Any conversations on that, Mike?
I'll just say, I mean, coming out of, again, from a lot of the conversations we've had, and even with our focus groups, for a while, we did not have a lot of activity at that particular site. It was more dedicated to roller hockey. And then the roller hockey league dwindled in numbers and eventually went away. But now we are seeing a lot more activity with the skating. So I think throughout this process, it's something to definitely look at, because we've always looked at that as a multi-use facility. And I think there could be multiple uses we could have there that could absolutely benefit a lot of the users there. So I think that's something we'll look at throughout this process.
Yeah. And then Marnix talks about 97 city document mentioned plans for a trail from Southampton Park to a Rose Drive trail. Do you know about this? Is that a possibility? I don't know how it would connect, but that would be nice.
And I would say, yes, we're aware of that being in the 97 plan, and that is something that we will assess in this process.
Okay. All right. No outdoor parks. Jeff says dedicated to pickleball. Sharing the hockey rink is a poor solution. Sport is growing fast, especially over the 50s. Can we get some dedicated courts?
And I'll just say we're absolutely aware of pickleball, and We have, the indoor courts, unfortunately, we're not able to offer at this time. So for the outdoor courts, yes, this is something we need to address in this because we know the growing popularity of pickleball. And I think that's been throughout the whole US. I know particularly in California. So this is something that we will be looking at. And then in the interim, looking at what possibilities we have in town, something I'm currently having discussions with the high school. When their courts do eventually open back up, is there some space that we could have pickleball use that the community could use prior to hopefully in the future being able to build permanent courts?
Okay. Carrie speaks about another nice feature would be a map of historic sites in the hardscape of the public art park. So visitors or citizens would be able to see where they can find other points of interest in Benicia. That's a really good point. Thank you, Carrie. Gretchen speaks about when will Benicia start looking into park sponsorships? When will we have a bio-rad soccer field? Mike, thoughts?
I don't know if I have an answer for that at this time. We haven't looked into sponsorships. It's going to be as we go forward, depending on what funding sources we do have available. I think that in the future could be an option maybe we have to look at if we get to a point that we don't have funding. So absolutely something we could consider in the future.
Wonderful. We have about 3 or 4 minutes left. So there are some questions later on. If Vic, if you or Theron want to just type the responses to those while I go through the questions in the beginning, that would ensure we get through all of these as well. Bill speaks about 2 things. One, can parks be educational and creative, perhaps reflecting on the history of Benicia and creative play and open to differently able participants? Really good point. And also would love to see public art park near tennis and bocce courts as well. Bill, thank you very much for that. Carrie has a couple of thoughts too. One is Phil Joy has indicated an interest in developing access to the old Vaughan 5-star general store. Just a note about the previous comment. Carrie got it. Thank you. Lauren mentions, if I recall correctly, the wooden park on First Street was constructed with the help of volunteers. Any chance something like that could happen again, volunteer action? A nice example of similar construction is in Winters. The park was funded through their Rotary, I believe. Mike?
Yeah, City Park, the Playground of Dreams, obviously a lot of that was built by volunteers many years ago, and we're actually looking at that. It's going to be one of the parks that we're going to have to replace. It's a little bit more difficult now to have volunteers construct public projects, but there is that possibility. But we will reach out to the community when we get to that point. And hopefully we have that money available for that replacement. We'll do a lot of public outreach and make sure that we put the right playground back in place in City Park.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. We are at our time here. So I do want to say again, as we'd spoken about this, this is just one of the avenues, not the only one. So please check back on lovebeniciaparks.com tomorrow. We'll be uploading this PowerPoint as well as the recordings from today and yesterday, and continue to please stay engaged. The more you participate, the more reflective this plan is of the community's vision and the values. And ultimately, that is what all of us want. So also feel free to reach out through the open-ended comment box or email the city, Mike or Vic, if you have any follow-up questions. And we look forward to staying in touch with all of you. Thank you again. Have a great evening, everybody. Bye-bye.